There is a man in his late 60s who wakes up every Saturday morning before his family stirs. He walks past the kitchen, skips the coffee, and goes straight to the garage. Inside sits a 1974 Citroën DS, cream-colored, slightly dusty, with a suspension system so unusual it looks like it belongs to another planet. He does not drive it. He just stands there. Then he opens the hood and begins checking things that do not need checking. Nobody in his family understands it. His wife calls it an obsession. His adult children call it avoidance. His neighbor, who owns a perfectly functional SUV, calls it a waste of money.
But none of them are asking the right question. The question is not why he keeps the car. The question is what the car is keeping for him. To understand this behavior, you have to go back, not to his garage, to the world he was formed in. People who dedicate serious emotional energy to preserving old luxury cars did not arrive at this behavior randomly. Most of them came of age during a specific window, the post-war decades stretching from the late 1950s through the mid-1970s, a period when the relationship between human beings and manufactured objects was fundamentally different from what it is today. Objects were built to last. They were heavy. They had smell and texture and mechanical personality. A car was not a screen on wheels. It was a physical event. During this era, a luxury car was one of the few objects in ordinary life that communicated permanence. Governments changed. Borders shifted. The Cold War turned everyday life into a low-grade anxiety exercise. Children in this period practiced nuclear drills in school hallways. Families watched the evening news and heard about proxy wars and political assassinations and currency crises. The world felt unstable in a way that was never quite spoken aloud at the dinner table, but was always present, like static on an untuned radio. Into that instability, a well-engineered automobile offered something remarkable. It was knowable. It had rules. If you learned its systems, its carburetor, its transmission, its electrical architecture, it would respond predictably. In a world where large forces felt entirely beyond individual control, mechanical mastery was one of the few places where effort and outcomes still aligned. That is not a small thing. That is a psychological anchor. This is where most people misread the classic car owner. They assume it is about nostalgia, in the sentimental sense, a desire to return to something simpler or prettier. But the actual psychological engine driving this behavior is much more specific. It is about competence. It is about a particular kind of knowing that the modern world has quietly made obsolete. Consider what happened to skilled knowledge between the 1950s and the 1990s. A man who understood how to rebuild a carburetor in 1965 was someone who understood how the world worked in miniature. He could diagnose a problem by sound. He could fix it with his hands. He was, in a meaningful sense, literate in a language that mattered. Then something shifted. Cars became computerized. The hood of a modern vehicle is increasingly a place where human hands are not useful. Diagnostics require proprietary software. Repairs require dealership appointments. The intimate relationship between owner and machine, that slow accumulation of mechanical knowledge, was gradually replaced by a service relationship. You do not understand your car. You pay someone else to interface with it on your behalf. For someone who built their sense of self around that older form of competence, this transition was not just inconvenient, it was a quiet erasure. The old luxury car in the garage is, in part, a refusal of that erasure. It is a domain where their knowledge still counts, where their hands are still relevant, where the education they absorbed over decades, from fathers, from neighbors, from grease-stained repair manuals bought at petrol stations, still has value. There is another layer. And this one connects to how luxury itself was understood during the post-war decades. In the late 1950s and through the 1960s, luxury goods were not aspirational in the current sense. They were not available to everyone if you simply worked hard enough or found the right financing option. Luxury meant genuine scarcity. A Jaguar E-Type, a Citroën DS, a Lancia Aurelia. These were objects that most people could only observe from the pavement. They existed at a distance, and that distance created a specific psychological imprint. For a young person who grew up watching these cars pass through the streets of a European city or an American boulevard, the object accumulated meaning the way myths accumulate meaning, through distance, repetition, and desire. The car became associated not just with wealth, but with a specific idea of what human excellence looked like when it took physical form. Later in life, when circumstances allowed, acquiring and preserving one of these vehicles was not merely a hobby, it was a completion. It was closing a loop that had been open for 40 years. Psychologists who study object attachment describe a phenomenon called extended self theory. The idea is that human beings incorporate certain possessions into their sense of identity so completely that the object stops being something they own and becomes something that partially constitutes who they are. This is most pronounced with objects that connect to formative emotional experiences, particularly experiences involving aspiration, transition, or loss. The old luxury car sits at the intersection of all three. It connects to who the owner wanted to become, it marks a transition from the life they had to the life they built, and it holds somewhere inside its bodywork and leather a version of the world that no longer exists. That world is gone, but the car is still here. As long as the car runs, something of that world persists. This is what the family in the kitchen does not see. They see a man spending Saturday mornings in a garage with a car that goes nowhere. What they are not seeing is that the car is not supposed to go anywhere. It is supposed to stay. Its entire function has shifted from transportation to testimony. It testifies that a certain kind of world existed, that a certain kind of craftsmanship was real, that a man who learned to understand machines through patience and attention built something that time has not entirely erased. There is a social dimension here as well. People who preserve old luxury cars often form communities, clubs, forums, weekend gatherings that operate according to codes of knowledge and seriousness that most modern social spaces no longer have room for. In these communities, status is earned through demonstrated competence, not through title or follower count. A man who can correctly identify an engine modification by listening to an exhaust note commands genuine respect. A woman who sources original interior components from 3 different countries and fits them herself is understood to have done something real. These communities preserve not just cars, but a particular form of social recognition that the broader culture has mostly discarded. And here, the behavior reveals its final, most uncomfortable truth. The people who keep old luxury cars alive are often described as eccentric, as impractical, as people who cannot let go of the past. But the actual dynamic is almost the opposite. These individuals identified, sometimes consciously and sometimes not, that something genuinely valuable was being lost as the world accelerated into disposability. They made a choice, at personal cost, against social pressure, often without the ability to fully articulate why, to preserve it. They are not unable to live in the present. They are refusing to accept the present's assumption that everything old is merely waiting to be replaced. They are making an argument with their hands and their time and their money that certain things were made so well, with such care, that abandoning them represents a failure of attention rather than a sensible update. The cream-colored Citroën in the garage is not a symptom. It is a statement. And the man who stands in front of it on Saturday mornings, checking things that do not need checking, is not stuck. He is doing something that most people around him have forgotten how to do. He is paying attention to something that asked, through its engineering and its materials and its survival across 50 years, to be taken seriously. The question was never why he keeps the car alive. The question is what it says about everyone else, that they stopped noticing it was worth keeping.